Okay, we're live. It's slightly late, but yeah, this week we're going to be talking about the rise of FinOps for data teams, and who better to speak about this but Ian Whitehouse from Select Dev. So, Ian, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No worries, a pleasure. I love what you guys are doing. So it's just been a matter of time till we got you on to talk about it. So. I think for the audience, I normally try and give a bit of background of where I'd met the guests. So, Ian, I think we met obviously on LinkedIn first of all, but met up at some of the conferences. Love your posts, what you're doing around highlighting the benefits of having a FinOps and benefits of optimizing your Snowflake environments, getting the best bang for your buck. But for people who don't know you, would you like to give yourself a bit of an introduction, a bit of background about yourself and the company?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. And thanks again for having me. I've been in the data space my whole career. Well, if you count my university years where I was working in like oil and gas, I guess that part wasn't a true like data practitioner role, though I ended up spending all my time in like spreadsheets and doing kind of data things without the title. So yeah, I've been doing that. I started my career at Capital One, worked there for about 3 years, then did 3.5 years at Shopify. So I didn't, everyone, because we'll jump ahead to what I do now, which is I started a company called Select, which is all about helping data teams manage their data warehouses from a FinOps standpoint with a focus on Snowflake. And for those who don't know, Capital One has a competing product called Slingshot, and everyone thinks I was like part of that team.
I was just making note of that now. Anyway, but you got ahead of it. Yeah. So
yeah. So I can talk about this later in the dynamics there. But anyways, to quickly summarize, we can dive into that. It could be a fun one. But I spent 3 years at Capital One, and then I went to Shopify and spent 3.5 years. And that's kind of where I started first seeing the problem of spend on data warehousing products. We were not using Snowflake there. We were using a ton of Spark, a ton of on-premise Spark. And I have a separate rant I'm going to go on, not rant, well-structured.
This is the place. This is the place to rant.
About total cost of ownership of Spark, because I'm seeing a lot of Databricks people slamming Snowflake, and it's just a load of shit. So we'll come to that. But I saw, big spend issues with both Spark and BigQuery. And that's kind of where I was like, there needs to be proper tooling in place to help data teams manage this. That's what led to Select. We started with Snowflake first because it's an awesome platform with like an incredible place for partners, an incredible ecosystem for people to build technologies on top of Snowflake because of the metadata they serve up, because of their, joint care for customer, like long-term customer success. So anyways, we started with Snowflake. This problem or the need for FinOps is a universal problem that is warehouse agnostic. So anyways, that's a bit about me.
Yeah. And it's been great to see what you've been doing. And I think it's also the education aspect you've been putting on your posts. You're there to let people know how to get, I use this term, the best bang for your buck with Snowflake. I've seen the bashing as well, and we can go on to that in a bit. But
Sure.
The comments that get said on Snowflake's expensive, and obviously my history goes back a little bit further. So I've been in the world of the Teradata's, the Exadatas, the Netezas. They were expensive.
Yeah, they were expensive, but they just didn't change each month, which is probably why. And this will get into like the need for FinOps, but that part of that may be why they didn't get talked about. I think another element is just how quickly these things get adopted among the organization due to their ease of use. But I'm interrupting you, so yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a good change. It's about that. Sometimes the ease of its use has been the downside of it. So back to that, it's expensive, and I use the analogy: it's expensive to heat your house if you leave your windows and doors open. So it doesn't have to be expensive, and also comparing it back to, as I mentioned, the cost of those very, very large appliances, which, as you say, didn't change on a month-by-month basis. But the difference there was you'd already paid up front, and you'd already probably done some forecasting of your potential usage, and also you definitely the people that are working on them were more skilled because it was a very much a niche skill set there. You wrote very optimized, tuned queries where the cost, I'm not talking the financial cost, the cost of the optimizer, the explain plan, was very low. So you didn't the need for FinOps wasn't there. It was actually pushed further along because you'd already done it as part of your due diligence and planning for acquiring your capital expenditure, which is your big appliance. So yeah, so now it's becoming even more important, I believe. But yeah, I'd love to hear a bit more on where you saw the need for this and what made you start your journey with SelectPair.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny, we quick kind of tangent on what you did with these on-prem systems. So when I was at Capital One, we used Teradata right when I started, and I joined at the beginning of their cloud migration. So they're going from Teradata to AWS Shop. This is publicly available. Started on Redshift, and then Capital One's actually famous in the Snowflake world because they were one of the first
investors,
one, if not the first, like financial institution to put their weight behind Snowflake and say, this is our data warehouse we're going to use. And they invested in Snowflake as well, and probably made a pretty penny off of that when they went public. So anyways, that was kind of the history there. And on that point about these on-prem systems, like, yes, you kind of did your cost negotiation up front. There were still maintenance challenges and like management challenges, but instead of cost, they were around performance. We had a guy who would email you. His name was actually, I don't know if I should say his name, but anyways, there was a guy who would email you if you wrote a query that was too expensive because of like there's fixed compute. So your problem moves from like flexible compute to you have a fixed amount of resources, and you need to make sure everyone's things are perfectly tuned so that they don't eat up too much of this shared resource pool. So it's funny. It was like a rite of passage where you'd get this email from this random dude no one knew, and because it's a company of like 50,000 people. So you'd get this email from someone you've never heard of being like, hey, you did this really dumb thing in your query. And it was funny. It was kind of like a rite of passage to get this email from this guy because you like really kind of made a recursive exploding join somehow. So
maybe you should make a module in your platform that becomes this guy, Bob, as we've called him, that will actually email you when it sees a query plan that's so stupid. You've done a cross join, a Cartesian join, and then you can message and say, wait.
So this problem still exists. And like, this is part of why people buy our product, because they don't want to be the query police anymore. Like this problem still exists, but instead of, hey, your performance is eating up all the CPUs in this shared cluster, it's like, hey, you've written this job that's now costing the company $20,000 a year because of this inefficiency. So it's like the same thing. It's just shift, like the metric you're optimizing against has changed. So that absolutely still exists. So, and we can keep going on that, but you did ask a question of like how I got into this space and what I saw the need for. So I'm happy to revisit that before we go back to the query police.
Just go with the flow. Go with the flow. It's
okay,
fine.
Sure. So yeah, let's come back to the query police one because I think it's a fun one. But yeah, again, the whole kind of impetus for this started. I was at Shopify. It was 2022, and for those who don't remember, 2022 was the year where costs became in vogue. Like everyone started caring about how much money they were spending as a whole, not just on Snowflake, on all things, on people, on infrastructure, on cloud infrastructure, on data infrastructure. And everyone started asking questions about how much were you spending? And I think data warehouses are a bit further behind compared to the counterparts in the cloud. In terms of cost visibility. Snowflake, if you look where they were like 3 years ago to today, they've made a ton of really great investments in their cost management tool, and you get way more visibility than you did before. But anyways, like I don't even remember. I don't know what we were spending at Shopify on BigQuery, but like you can guess with any company, or at least I can guess because I've talked to so many customers, like anyone at that scale is spending millions of dollars a year minimum on their data warehouse. And that is mostly like a black box of costs. You can like track things in BigQuery, at least at like a project level, but you then make it a project that's like this project costs $300,000 a year. Like, what is that money being spent on? You have kind of an equivalent in Snowflake of like you'll have like, I see customers with a single virtual warehouse that costs like over $1 million a year, one virtual warehouse. That's why very early on we built, like, we open sourced how to calculate cost per query, because like that's the thing you need to be looking at, is what are the jobs and how much each of those jobs cost. So anyways, that's what I started seeing at Shopify, is like people started asking questions about where this money was being going, and people started caring about like, hey, how much of this is waste? Do we actually need all these things? Like if you don't, yeah, I could go on, but if you don't monitor these things, it just becomes a black box and a black hole of people ship things, they schedule them, they pick a resource size that's way too big, and then they leave it, and because they don't know. I found a dashboard that was costing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in like BigQuery costs, one dashboard, and the team had no idea, rightfully so, because like, how are they supposed to know how much it cost? Because no one had ever told them to look, and no one had ever shown them that in an easy to find place. And the solution there was like, don't run it 24 times a day, once every hour. It's just like, change how often you run it, and you can save hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've just been making some notes there as well. And I've been using Snowflake since 2017, I think. So I think I helped implement Deliveroo in the UK, which is the first European implementation, and then went on to Sainsbury's and did a bake off between Teradata and Redshift then, and the rest is history. And then set this company up. But I think where I was going with that was, Snowflake has evolved over the time, and I suppose originally it was very easy for it to win. I saw that because the cost that we were seeing on Redshift or even Teradata were much more than the cost that we were doing the benchmarking with Snowflake. But what I think has changed over that time is the blueprint or standard way they say you set Snowflake up is you set a warehouse up per load. So one for ingest for that department, one for ingest for this department, and you're able to recharge back based on the warehouses. I think things have changed a lot more now with the ability to do query tagging and maybe having general warehouses which serve a purpose, but then you can actually recharge based on the usage of that warehouse rather than the warehouse itself. Do you see that making a big difference with people's costs?
Yeah, 100%. Like this is one of the things we work with all of our customers on. Snowflake's had this in private preview forever. I'm not sure when they're going to release it, but they have like a warehouse utilization metric. We've and cost per query. We've had, so we surface up warehouse utilization in a product, which tells you like how well utilized is that warehouse. It's purely from we can't calculate compute utilization because we don't have access to those metrics. But even if you just look at like, of the time this warehouse is up, how often is it actually processing queries? Like any customer who goes down that approach of like, I'm going to create a warehouse for every department and workload type will have very underutilized warehouses.
Yes.
And keep in mind, like we're going to talk about Snowflake, exact same thing exists in Databricks with their shared compute clusters and their SQL warehouses, et cetera. So a lot of things we work with customers on is if they have that set up in place, how do you move towards a share, wherever possible, shared warehouses? Now, there's always going to be, there's two extremes of like you create a warehouse for every use case and you have one warehouse which does everything. Like the answer is always going to be in the middle. But generally, I'd say many customers are probably too far down I think this side was too many warehouses and need to move closer back towards having shared warehouse wherever possible. It is more challenging to like, you either need to buy tooling that does this for you, or you need to invest in building out a bunch of tooling to do, because the unit that Snowflake reports on is they bill per warehouse. So you have to come up with ways to attribute costs using either a combination of query tags or query metadata. This becomes complicated by the fact that customers who use tools like Looker or DBT, those all run under a single Snowflake user, right? So it's not only is it could it be in a shared warehouse, but it's a single Snowflake user. So like some of the things, go ahead.
No, you carry on. I'll make notes because I don't interrupt. I try not to interrupt. Keep going.
I was just going to say, like, yeah, some of the things we do with our customers, which is really cool, is like, say you have this DBT project, which again, like anytime you do transformations in the warehouse, regardless of whether you're using DBT or TAS or anything, like that will be usually like 70% of your compute costs, which makes sense. You're shifting all of the hard work up front so that BI tools can have a much better querying experience, right? So how do you then take this 70% of costs and kind of flexibly divide it to the different teams so they can have ownership over the things they're doing? We'll come back to that ownership topic. But yeah, so like one of the ways we work with our customers is, you can put in meta keys in DBT, or which is like a way to tag your models in DBT. You can even use like, I'm pretty sure we have the ability to take a look like the group that a user belongs to in Looker, and then you can assign costs that way. So you know that their dashboards and things, explorers they're building, get mapped back to this cost. So yeah, the name of the game once you move to shared warehouses becomes how are you going to divide those shared costs among these different groups?
Yeah, and I've seen this complication. I've lived the dream, so to speak. But as you say, it's all about the metadata. And Snowflake made it easy if you did everything at warehouse level, but it didn't give you the best bang for your buck. And to go and do it in a way that you're getting the optimized use for the setup, but without removing the ability to actually understand the usage and then the associated recharging and evidence it as well. Because the other thing is great, you can go and recharge it, but as soon as that department says, I didn't use that much, well, yes, you did. Well, I don't think so. And then you have to go and evidence that it's actually their usage. So
totally. That's one of the benefits of like customers having a third part. Like look, you guys, like people, I'm not going to plug our product, but that is a benefit of like, you have a third party be like, this is how much you were charged. And it's not left to like them being like, well, I don't trust your calculation. Trust a company with a team of tens of engineers who do nothing all day but allocate costs, right?
Yeah. And I think, as you mentioned, like Looker groups, Active Directory groups, or even groupings within your Microsoft domains. With you've got different groups in there as well. It's all that associated metadata, and Snowflake only has one piece of it as well. So unless you can get that information injected into logs that are going there. Do you see, and we touched on this slightly before, and I know your focus is on Snowflake, but when the FinOps, when the finance director says, how much is my data platform cost me? Then you need to include, okay, now you've nailed Snowflake, but what about all the other products that sit around it as well?
Yeah, Fivetran, DBT, Looker, Power BI. That's a whole other can of worms. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm going to pick on the ingest tool that we mentioned. Okay, Fivetran anyway. Ethan Aaron does anyway all the time now. but I mean, there's a thing of joining that cost up, because you're going to get the cost from Fivetran for its compute, but it also generates a lot of compute on the Snowflake side. Yeah. So being able to say, okay, right, well, that Fivetran cost is also generating this much Snowflake cost, and then, as you say, the rest of the journey, the DBT use of it as well for any transformation. So it becomes not just one place you have to do this financial analysis. It becomes a whole ecosystem. And I've not plug it. I like doing architecture stuff because it's more challenging and better than my day job most of the time. But I did for a client not that long ago a blueprint for a FinOps platform, so to speak. But it was still just on top of Snowflake, but it was using data from lots of other places. So you're using Snowflake to go and harvest this information from other places, using tagging or business units that are in your finance system to bring it all in that one place, and actually have being able to do that analysis of that in a single place. So it's combining your Snowflake metadata with any other metadata to have a full data platform view of your costings. Is that something that you're seeing your customers need to do, or is that something you're looking to extend into?
I'd say a bit of Yes. It's the best answer. I would say that most customers are not at the maturity level where they are. A combination of like not at the maturity level, and probably juice is not worth the squeeze to like if you spend, let's say you spend like $1 million on Snowflake a year, like you may be spending like 100K a year on Fivetran. I'm pulling up these numbers. I actually don't have visibility into like how much people spend on Fivetran, but I think Fivetran disclosed their numbers recently. I think they're making like 300 million a year. So people are spending a lot of money on Fivetran, but relative to Snowflake, which is 10x that, right? Snowflake's like 3 billion in revenue. Fivetran is 300. Like just the proportion of the magnitude is like people are going to spend their time focusing on Snowflake and probably not bother trying to figure out how to allocate this thing that's like 1/10 of the cost, right? So no, I wouldn't say what. Okay, so people are using Snowflake as the central. Many people are using Snowflake as a central source to ingest costs across the company. So I do want to caveat my answers. They'll pull in their and we've talked to FinOps teams at companies who use Snowflake as like, we're going to put all of our billing data from AWS, GCP, Azure, Datadog, blah, 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 and Snowflake, centralize it there, and then build up our FinOps practice across the company. But I have not seen anyone who's like, we're going to put in Power BI licensing costs plus Fivetran and then like do that, right? Because they're just like smaller numbers that's like people don't care as much about.
I like the term, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. But I do think that we're going to get to the stage where there's going to be many companies that fall into that category that the juice is worth the squeeze. The squeeze is worth the juice. And that's and that's where they're large organizations, and I think there's the continuing change of licensing for companies. And I'm not picking on DBT. You know, they changed from per seat to per execution not that long ago. Fivetran put in another change. I think I can't remember what it was, but they put a change in.
Have they released MAR V2? What is it? What is it now? Or was MAR the change they went to?
Yeah, I'm not too sure where they are with that, but I know that if you go to the cost calculators that are out there, then you can see that there's a very big difference between them. And I suppose Fivetran maybe have to charge more because they sponsor lots of happy hours and events and Formula racing.
I think this is like a VC thing, getting ready for IPO. But one sec, my headphones are gonna die. I just need to switch to these. Classic. You can't have one pair of headphones. You need two.
Cool. You're back.
I am back.
Cool.
Sound still okay?
Yep. All perfect. I think sorry. There's that tipping point.
I saw prices are trying to squeeze out a bit more revenue.
And I think being on top of that and being able to say, well, okay, what would the impact be if that with that price, that licensing, definitely ahead of any negotiations you may have with that vendor. I think vendors have got this sort of view that we're so sticky now, you're never going to move off us, and they may be right in some of those places. But to have the numbers to hand or being able to calculate it, especially when there's going to be a licensing chain imposed on you, so it does that the additional cost that make justify the need for us to move off that and still be quids in. And I know
it's a great question. It's a classic company in every classic playbook in every kind of modern technology company is you like build something so sticky and that is such a core part of the business that you can eventually raise prices and know that like your price raise will be enough for the person to like not be willing to move off given how ingrained it is into the business. So jury's out on whether how many people are going to mass migrate to like Portable instead of Fivetran or these other solutions. But I'd be careful I don't get shot. But like I view the data loading space largely as like it feels more like a commodity. Like if you have a pipeline in place that loads data from Postgres to Snowflake and it's gets you the data there on time and it's reliable, like why are you going to choose one versus the other? You're going to pick the one with the, obviously, like assuming you trust the vendors and like they tick all these boxes, you're going to pick the one that gives you the best bang for your buck.
Exactly.
All things equal.
Yeah.
And that's a commodity.
And it's interesting where, the direction Snowflake's going with the ability to share data from, some of the large ones that they would have had, Salesforce, I think NetSuite's being planned, I think, as well, or, so just direct sharing from your platform.
Snowflake should have bought Fivetran like 5 years ago.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I think they bought HVR and they became too expensive after that. They blew them. They wanted a bit too much money. But what was I going to say? So, in fact, actually, Sonny had a question on here. Well, shout out some people: Sonny, JJ, Val. Thanks for tuning in.
Sonny Rivera, I know that guy.
Yeah. Data's a superhero. Yeah, he was on the show a few weeks ago talking about AI data products, or nice. Anti-AI, I think we called it. It's a mindset difference between adjusting from this on-prem. Yeah, so I'll let you answer that one. I've got a view on this, but what's your view on that?
Yes.
Simple answer, isn't it?
So yeah, to elaborate. Sorry, I'm being snarky. Yeah, totally. Like it comes back to that point I said earlier, where you're as the data platform team managing Snowflake, your goal has shifted from how do we make everyone happy from a performance standpoint with this fixed set of resources that we have to make sure are running performantly so they don't hog too much resources, to how do we make sure that finance and our budget holders are happy that like we aren't blowing through, aren't spitting up more resources than we need, aren't growing costs faster than business being generated from those. So yeah, the mindset difference shifts from kind of performance constrained resources to how do you manage cost growth in a reasonable way that aligns with make sure value is growing faster than costs.
And that's a good point. I just want to go on to the rise of data products. Everyone wants to monetize their data. Not everyone knows how to, and and one of the mechanisms is people talk about data products, and what makes a data product is a whole other debate. But for the simplistic term of this, it's a product that an external company or an internal company can use, and they're either paying for that service or there's some value internally from that service being provided. But the value needs to be, as you said, more than the associated cost.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it's not a business. You're doing it as a charity. I'm just doing it as a bit of fun, building some data stuff, and it's not actually benefiting or moving the dial of your business in the right direction.
Yeah.
And I think that the problem we've had is we haven't been able to evidence exactly how much a particular product costs. I know I've worked with some clients and a couple of them have done this. They've gone out and they've sold the dream, and the business have sold, okay, we're going to give you this. We're going to charge our customers an extra £100 a month for this service. And then they look to find out actually what it's costing to deliver when they did the math, rather than work it out before.
Yep.
They're making a loss. They're making a loss on it.
A bunch of our customers use, including ourselves. So our product runs on Snowflake. And so ourselves plus a bunch of our customers use Snowflake and actually build a data product on top of it that they go and sell to their customers. And like something we do for our own internal Snowflake account and something we do for help all of our customers do is understand cost per customer. So like any of our customers that comes onto our platform, within like 2 clicks in our UI, I can go filter by customer ID. And because we've tagged every DBT model, ingestion query, and query running from our web interface with that tenant ID, and the databases, I know our total cost per customer. And I also, we talked about like the Looker stuff before, like any of our customers can go in and say, hey, this dashboard that I just built for the business, here's how much it actually costs them. And here are all the users using it. And then you can actually feel better of like, okay, that actually makes sense. Or in some cases you can say, oh, wow, that's not worth $5,000 to the business to be running every day. This is something a product manager asked me for as like a one-off analysis that isn't being used anymore. So having that ability to just see those things, I'm never going to be able to tell you how valuable something is. That's for you to decide. But I can tell you down to the penny, here's how much it's costing you.
Yeah, well, yeah, and then you can see which ones that you think I don't want to use a customer anymore. I'm making a loss on you.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's not the case or any of them.
No, people use the, like, coming back to the data products piece, like they'll look at cost per customer and then give that information to their financing team to help them segment their customers and then decide how do we price this thing? How much do we upsell this person on this to make sure we're actually getting good unit economics? And in some cases, like, can we give it to free for this cohort of or bucket of customers or segment and just charge this group that actually, you know, gets their own dedicated warehouse or whatever.
So you're using it to drive like customer lifecycle value. So you can actually, okay, well, this one, like if they call, we answer it straight away because we make the most amount of money off this one. Whereas if this customer, okay, he calls every 2 minutes, and we don't make money from him, he can go into a different bucket of priority maybe.
Yeah.
And I think that's good to actually think of it. Yeah, as a true data product. It's a product with customers, and the customers have a value associated to them. So you can actually.
And this isn't just external customers. So the example I gave with like people going to finance and working with them on the economics, like that's for like when your product is embedded and like in like an analytics dashboard and then being served out to their customers. So our customers, but like 80%, probably even 90% of data teams only have internal customers, but you can still have that conversation with those customers. And this is kind of a shift we've seen among our customer base is they want to be able to, because like the bill lands on the data team, right? The data team is the one costing the company $1 million a year on Snowflake, but they want the tools to be able to say like, well, actually like that $200,000 our bill increased by this year, that's because marketing came on and started doing all these use cases. And they want to be able to say like, hey, no, that spend is theirs, which they should. Like it shouldn't all be a platform cost. So it applies just as much to internal kind of cost and value as it does external.
Yeah. So I've just been making some notes and things to come back to. So slightly off topic, but I just want to go back to, we talk about explain plans or as I know, these query profiles within Snowflake. Do you see that as a, put back my Oracle days, you know, that was, I used to go to that every single day looking at my queries the whole time. You know, it was like my dashboard of you know what was happening and it was an everyday service I used to ensure that I was everything was going well. I don't see the same usage. It's normally an afterthought sometimes I see in Snowflake. They go, oh, have you looked at the query? Oh, no, I haven't really. And you look at it and it's like, you know, it's It's
so I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. And that sounds weird coming from a guy who cares about performance. And the reason I think it's a good thing is like in Snowflake, the reason people buy Snowflake is like 95, maybe even like 99% of the time, you shouldn't have to go and look at a query profile. Like Snowflake just optimizes your query and runs it in a way that is most effective. So you can focus on getting that end value to the customer, not worry about tuning your query. And this may be a little tease into the whole Spark and Databricks world, but I won't go there yet. So most of the time you don't need to, but what's missing is people don't have those tripwires in place to say this particular job actually warrants going in and looking at the query profile to make sure things are performing the way they expect. And because it is expensive, right? So that's what teams are missing. So I wouldn't say that, like, again, it's two extremes, right? There's like, hey, every query I run in Snowflake, I'm going to go stare at the query profile and spend like 30 minutes trying to figure out what that means. And then there's the other end where it's like, we just ship, never look at the query profile. There needs to be a set of kind of rules and thresholds. And this is something we try and guide our customers with through tooling of like, this thing warrants having a look at. The rest of these, the 99%, the 95%, whatever the threshold is, don't worry about it.
So I think you're right, but I've got probably two minds on it. Maybe one's that purist mind coming from that background. I think everyone should write efficient queries. But so I think it's a good educational process. You don't maybe have to do it every time, but maybe at the beginning when you're learning, have a look at them. Have a look at them, see what it's doing, and get an understanding of it, because you will write better queries because of it. Because later on you go, oh, I remember last time if I did the joins across multiple keys on this, or I did the filtering at the cardinality at a higher level, or whatever, or I didn't have to do a to-char on something, so it was a literal, it was stored in the query, sorry, in the metadata. So I think there is a not having to, great, but I think if you're working in this area, data industry, you should probably
fully align. Like everyone,
to
everyone should be able to read a query profile if you're on Snowflake. And I have some resources I can share after on like ways to do that. And I'll also be doing I heard you just say like you need to remember to do the to-char, blah, blah, blah. That can screw up the metadata. I'm literally doing a webinar this Friday on query pruning in Snowflake, which touches on both how to read a query profile and then also ways you can screw up query pruning, which is one example you just listed, where you like convert something to a character and then Snowflake can't do the static compilation.
As soon as you put some function around it, it's not in the metadata. It's going to go back to the. It's going to go back to having to work out.
You get a full table scan. You get a full table.
Yeah,
scan.
you go.
So yes, everyone should know how to read a query profile. What I want to avoid is that now every person looks at every single query they write and go looks at the query profile, right? That's kind of the difference. Is like most of the time you should focus on doing your job and getting the number out to the business that's going to drive some decision, or building the new monitoring that's going to empower X. Like that should be your focus, and you should not worry about anything else. But you should have tripwires, guardrails in place to say, oh, wait a second, let's come back and look at this before we schedule it to run every hour of the day for the next 3 years.
Yeah. Something that I've seen this in a client linked to this, that statement really is that, and the comment is the juice worth the squeeze. Focus is, we used to be on a nightly call, maybe it was weekly, maybe it was starting nightly, went to weekly, which was looking at people phoning up saying they got problems with their queries and weren't performing well, or it'd come up as this is a really high costing query. And we'd have a lot of people on this call, some of the Snowflake professional services, people on there as well. We'd look into it, and I think it became quite apparent over time is that wasn't the most efficient use of the time of everyone there. But these are senior people calling up. You had to see to address. They've got a problem. You had to look at it. And what we found was looking at everything on an individual query level, and then going and reacting based on the results of that query wasn't the way to do this. What you want to do is look at how often that query was run, and also how often that query is run as a profile, not an individual query, because a query will be a query if it's got GBP or Euro. It's the same query, but someone's put a parameter in there that's just for a different currency or a different date range. And we spent a lot of time building something we call the tuning factory. I think I mentioned this when I met you the first time.
Oh yeah, I do.
Yeah, to strip out all the literals, take out any white spaces, and then create a hash of that. And the idea was we'd then go and report to that and go, that query profile costs this amount of money, even though that query is really bad. It's only run once every 2 years. Let it go. 4 credits is 4 credits. It doesn't matter. Whereas this one, it's only half a credit it costs, but it's run 20 times a day. Let's see if we can get that one down a little
100%. 100%. Sorry, let me finish. No, you finish your thought.
Yeah, I think that Snowflake now release features to actually remove literals from that. Is that correct now?
Yes, they released something called a query parameterized hash.
Is it any good?
Does an element of this. I think it's great that they added it. I think everything, there's ways you can go further. Like I can't remember the last time. So zooming back a bit, we'll come back to Snowflake's query parameterized hash, but like you are spot on. This is one of the things I see a lot of customers. So obviously when we go in and like talk about our product, we're talking to the data team is like, well, I have this Power BI dashboard that I look at my most expensive queries in it. And like, as soon as I hear that, I'm like, so your queries are not expensive. Workloads, recurring things are expensive, right? Do you remember that story I told of the dashboard? That was at Shopify that was costing like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. That dashboard consisted of, the reason it was expensive was I guess 3 reasons. There was, first of all, 50 queries that ran every time that dashboard was invoked. those queries scanned a lot of data, and that dashboard ran frequently. That dashboard would never have come up as a costly thing that you should focus on if I had just looked at cost per query. Even if I'd done query parameterized hash in BigQuery and like anonymized the queries, grouped them together, it still wouldn't have come up because it wasn't aggregated to the right asset level, right? You need to put it back to like, oh, this executive dashboard, I can't even remember what the thing was, but it was something like that. That is the thing that's costing them much. So zooming back, you're spot on. Like, one, queries are not expensive in Snowflake, except for the odd one where like someone runs something on a 4XL over the weekend and it like runs for 3 days. Like, sure, that will be like a couple $1,000s for one query. But for most people, a given query is cheap. Queries only become expensive if they're run frequently and for a long time, right? So yeah, you need to do, and like the query parameterized hash is a great starting point. It will get you like probably like 80% of the way there. That still doesn't do the like group it back towards like, you know, you can have like DBT models, for example, which are like multiple queries. So you actually want to take all of those query parameterized hash and then group them together. Same with the dashboard, but it's still a great starting point of like analysis is like, you should be looking at like, what are workloads that are running, not what are queries.
So, and I think it's basically the depth of the query and then the workload that it all linked to. So those queries, you know, they may be the same queries, but different parameters being put into it. But be able to group all those queries up into a logical grouping that's delivering a data product. So it's a combination of the tagging aspect and the
So we did that. Yeah, it's funny. So everyone has kind of done some version of this. The first thing we released like 2 years ago when we built the product was we call it a query pattern. We still have it today in our product as like the default level of grouping we do when you cannot associate a query or a query pattern or a query parameterized hash with any other business thing. It's the default thing. But that's like it's still very helpful. It is the least helpful compared to like we have first class integration with like Snowflake task, for example. A task can run a stored procedure, which is like the most common thing people put in a task, a stored procedure, which then kicks off like 10 other queries every time it runs. So you want to group all of those together into a workload. Same thing with like, you have a dashboard which kicks off like 30 queries every time it runs. You want to group all those up to a dashboard. And then you tell people, hey, this dashboard costs you this much money, right? Not query parameterized hash 4315E6Z XXXB costs you. And someone's like, what's that?
So yeah, I've just been, there's some other things that popped into my mind as we were going. There was and we talked about guardrails earlier, and there's some really low hanging fruit that I go to places and I see that what just why do you sort this out? Like query timeouts, you know, being set for like 48 hours and things like that, because there's going to be someone at some point will write a rogue query and they'll just either, if they got access, they'll put a bigger warehouse as it. They'll go home. I think it'll finish in the morning, and you've just got like a 50-60 grand bill. So I think there's some real low-hanging fruit that you should have there. Is always make sure the query timeout set to it, or default for an account set to an acceptable amount. I'm not going to say exactly what it should be because I'm going to do my contender. It depends.
I have a hot take on query timeouts. Completely agree. They're like, everyone should look at them. Where I see people go wrong is they go to the extreme end and set query timeouts across the board to 1 hour. What you want to think about is cost timeouts, right? Yes. What's the maximum cost I want to allow a single query to run? And the reason that's not, it's proportional to time and size. So you do not want to restrict, like I see people put in a 1 hour query timeout on a extra small warehouse. So an extra small warehouse costs 1 credit an hour in Snowflake. Average cost per credit, call it $2.50. Congratulations, you just interrupted someone's work to save $2.50, right? So I don't mean to come up as harsh, but like that's the mindset you have to take. Is like, what's the maximum cost I'm trying to contain on an extra small warehouse? You could probably let something run for maybe a day, and that's fine. Like it costs $50 at most. but like, rather than like interrupt like think about each time you interrupt someone in their day-to-day work to like go figure out why that probably cost someone like an hour, maybe 2 hours of their time to go find out like, why did this get canceled? What's a query timeout? How do I make this work? Find the team to reach out to. You've just then costed the company like maybe like hundreds of dollars in waste from that person's. That's just their hourly rate. Not even accounting the value they could have generated in that time.
The perception of the data team has been, as you've got bad cred. You've got bad publicity, and we don't want bad publicity as data teams.
Yeah,
we want good publicity because we get enough kicking anyway.
Yeah, to wrap my thought, like, not to take away from your point, query timeouts are an amazing cost control strategy that everyone should look at. But my advice is don't go like to the extreme end and say query timeout of an hour.
One size fits all. Agreed.
About what's the maximum cost I'm trying to prevent from happening, and then set the timeout in there. So for a 4XL warehouse, you're probably going to set that to like an hour, maybe 2 hours. But for the extra small, you can be more lenient with that because the cost impact is not that big, and you don't want to disrupt work for humans unnecessarily.
It's a very, very good point. And it's no one size fits all, and we're all consultants. We have to say it depends. If JT's listening, he'll love that. I think the other one I had on there, and again, I think it depends on this. Is it's suspend, suspend and resume statuses on or settings on warehouses. Depend again. It depends, but have something. I think the default's 5 minutes. I think on some of them, but you can go down to seconds, so you can actually set it to like 60 seconds or so. But again,
you can set it like Snowflake bills for like a minimum 1 minute every time a warehouse resumes. So that's why I think they set I think you can actually effectively do it as 30 seconds, but you do risk getting double billed in certain scenarios. If like a warehouse resumes twice in the same minute, you get charged for 2 minutes instead of 1. On the extreme end, if you have a warehouse and you like suspend it every second, you can get billed for an hour and a minute. So anyways, like auto suspend is a great.
That's very, you heard it first here. Anyway, that's top tip.
Pay me for my knowledge. No, I'm just kidding. Auto suspend is a good thing to evaluate as like a quick win if you haven't looked at it yet. And good examples are like if you have the ETL pipeline that runs and then it doesn't need to sit there idle for 5 minutes until it turns off. BI, some in the cases I see people leave it higher is those like mission critical data products where they're making heavy use of the cache and they are aiming for very low query response times and do not want to compromise that by turning off the warehouse earlier.
That's a very good point, the caching aspect, because obviously the cache goes as soon as that warehouse is down, and you just that warehouse running and it being able to service a dashboard that's already had the stuff cached once. It's going to be much cheaper than actually putting it on and off every time because they have to re-query that data and put it into cache.
Yeah. So my easy advice to people is like experiment, try it, monitor it, measure it, make an informed decision, and just you don't have to be shooting from the hip. You can try it, see how it reacts, have a backup plan. It takes literally a second to change. So
yes, exactly. So look, we're approaching about 10 minutes left anyway. So I think it's time for the gloves off time. You can go full rant about Spark, and we can talk about debunk the myths that are out there at the moment.
Yeah. So this is something I've been meaning to write about for a while because and this will be good so I can kind of refine how I want to communicate.
Yeah, go for it.
So back when I was at Shopify, so it was pretty cool. Like Shopify started their data practice in like I can't remember what it was, like 2014, 2015. Largely in response to they were going public and needed to button up all of their reporting. They'd had like data kind of built throughout different parts of the business, but that really was a forcing function of like, okay, we need to solidify this. So what was really cool is they made a very early bet on Spark as the technology that would actually scale to the volumes that Shopify had and allow them to efficiently process data. So flash forward to like 2020, basically. So we eventually started migrating off of Spark to BigQuery, which is where I'm going to explain later. So you know where the story is going. But up until that point, for those like 6 years, it was a Spark shop. And we had, like every other kind of big tech company before DBT existed, we had our homegrown version data transformation tool of how do you go in and add a new data model to the data lake. And so Spark-based shop, I was going in and using Spark as to get my work done. And it was incredibly hard to use. Now, I'm an engineer. I loved learning about all the internals and little bits and dials. And like, I honestly got a lot of my, I guess like my self-worth really came from like, I was really good at Spark, largely in part because there was like senior engineers who'd been in the database industry for like 10, 20 years and taught us all how to use Spark, how to interpret the stack trace, how to tweak micropartitions, cluster memory, Python memory, nodes, etc. Like you could learn how to do all this stuff. And as a result, I got really good at it and like drew a lot of satisfaction out of that. And like kind of like my identity was tied. I love telling people like, well, what do you do for your day-to-day? And I'm like, I tune big data workloads. Like I was so proud of that. But then I switched from, I was an individual contributor doing my work, and I got really good at Spark so I could get stuff out quick. And I switched into a data team lead role. And my role switched from like do it myself to like build a team. I had to go hire 10 people, train them up and get them outputting value to the business. And I was spending all my time training people how to use Spark. When they got an error message, how do you read through this stack trace? And I was just like, this is the worst use of my time and their time learning how to do this stuff. And it was so funny because we had Trino, which was like, which was Presto. Well, we called it was Presto back then, but it's Trino now, which was like the query engine we could use to query the data lake. So everyone was prototyping their queries in SQL and Trino. And then they'd have to like, when they wanted to deploy it, they'd have to like go into Spark and figure out how to like convert this SQL to like Python. There's also like 18 different ways you can do things in Spark. So this like monolith was just an absolute mess of like all these different patterns being used. So it was a nightmare to try and actually like train a new person, even an experienced person like me. I could get something working in like 20 minutes in SQL. And then I'd go spend like, I'm not kidding, we'd go spend 2 days productionizing it like into Spark. And for me, that was like, I'm like, this is ridiculous. And then I heard about this team who was prototyping DBT and BigQuery as a new way of, as a replacement for Spark. And I was like, I need to be a part of this team because I'm having so much pain trying to get my team to output with this Spark-based solution. Like, this is the way we should be doing things. So this is a long ramble and I need to write a proper post, but that was kind of my story. And that comes into like this whole total cost of ownership conversation, which is sure. Like, I bet you we could probably tune a job to run cheaper on Spark than we could on BigQuery. But like the amount of time it takes to do that thing and the amount of jobs where that is like actually meaningfully moves the difference is just so not worth it. Like there's such a good, the guys who are actually really interested in hearing them talk about this is like the guys who made DuckDB, because not even the company who's like, commercializing it, MotherDuck, but like if you listen to the actual people who built DuckDB talk, they've saw through this bullshit of like everyone's going around thinking they need to use Spark for everything, and it's like you actually don't need a distributed cluster to compute your job. You can run this on a single node. And the analogy they use is like using Spark is like driving a dump truck through the city when you're going to get your groceries. Like, you don't need that. You need like a smart car or a scooter. Like you don't need a dump truck.
I was at a conference last Wednesday, I think it was. Joe was there, Ethan was there, and one of the guys from that had done developed co-founded MotherDuck. I can't remember his name now, but you know, I can go nerdy, but he was going to another level of like measurements of units and CPU levels and like cache level 2 cache. I'm thinking, whoa, it was very interesting. But yeah, there's computers, personal computers are so powerful nowadays that a lot of stuff can just be done.
Spark was built in a world where a single computer couldn't satisfy the needs of a processing job, but that, like everything, the fundamentals, like the underlying physics change, which forces like new things to be possible. So that's what's changed with that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where as engineers gravitate towards things they can tinker with and tune. I was one of them. I loved learning, and like this was awesome. But it like, because switching to SQL, there was nothing I could tune. I had to just focus on business value, not tuning, which like is the right thing for the business. I was probably less happy because I like couldn't personally, because I couldn't get that satisfaction from building those things and tweaking and getting to run. But like, yeah, you got to be, engineers are smart. You got to be careful understanding their motives when you ask them for their input on like, what system should we use? Should we use Spark? Should we use BigQuery? Should we use Spark? Should we use Snowflake? Because their bias will be towards pick the thing I enjoy more rather than what's going to actually deliver the most business value. Now, I don't want to totally shit on Spark. There were jobs we had at Shopify that absolutely were worth tuning and investing. So I'll give you an example of like data sets. Our team maintained page view level data sets. So what does that mean? Every time someone visited a page on a Shopify storefront, an event would get fired. Fun fact, this data set took 6 months to rebuild. 6 months of things running behind the scenes. So that is something that makes sense to use Spark for. Same like certain businesses in like in technology, in ad tech media, there are probably workloads they have that it actually makes sense to like have an engineer spend the time tuning the shit out of that thing. But like for the long tail of most jobs that people run on data, you do not need Spark. And that is going to be a negative ROI trade-off on like the TCO versus like, you maybe run it like a little more expensive in a data warehouse, but I will make that trade-off like every day of the week.
It's a really good point. I think it's probably have to close on this one, but it's like the horses for courses, and you know, the rise of Iceberg at the moment. And I've got some views on like, is it a technology led? Well, it is. It's a technology led sort of like pet project rather than actually a business led one at the moment. You know how it's being sold to the business. Oh, you can use any compute engine, and it's really cheap. You own the storage. We separate the computer storage. Yeah, you're true. But if you've already invested in something else,
we need to do a talk about Iceberg, because this is something I'm also like, it's a great story. It's a great story to sell. But as soon as you think about it a bit more, you're like, okay, so I'm going to give people access to like Snowflake and manage that there. And then like, what I'm also going to like let them go run queries on their local computer with DuckDB. Like, do you really want to govern that? What does that actually look like in practice?
We can't even data model in one platform correctly at the moment, let alone trying to have multiple locations that are all going to be in sync with the different data.
So
I think you're right.
There's a great story of like, hey, don't duplicate your storage and don't pay for like loading data into Snowflake if you don't need to. Great. That is incredible value in itself. But this whole like, I don't know, I think there's a lot of thinking that needs to be done on like this whole multi-compute engine for different things before it becomes like something that's actually adopted. Iceberg's teenage sex right now. Everyone's talking about it. No one's doing it.
I've used that analogy a few times, and I got some haters on LinkedIn from one of them. But
well, is it the one tech company that's like, we built our whole thing on Iceberg? Look, people are moving it like, but it's not this like, it's still early days. Like there's no denying it's still early days on Iceberg. I have no doubt that like the industry is going to move there over time. I'm just saying it's not this like widespread adoption thing. I personally like, I'm not going to have any of our engineers migrate any of our stuff to Iceberg because it's just not worth the trade-off for us to, I don't want to go be earlier adopters of this new technology. Like let the industry figure it out and then you move once it's actually mainstream.
I do think, it's something that will provide some benefit, but I don't think it's that magic bullet that everyone needs to jump on. We still need to really focus on delivering what the business need for now. And if Iceberg can deliver some of that, great, but don't force a whole migration to that strategy. And
totally, especially if you're spending like a couple $100,000 a year on Snowflake, which like, I don't know the numbers, but I would guess like the average Snowflake customer probably spends a couple $100,000, I would guess. Right? Like, are you going to go like disrupt your whole like quarter, like half year roadmap to move to Iceberg? Probably doesn't make sense. If you're spending like millions of dollars a year loading data sets, then maybe that's probably worth having some engineers spend some time on that. So wait and see.
Yeah, I think before they do it, I think you need to make sure you've got the right patterns, you've got the right guardrails in place to ensure that it's going to be a success and not just another mess of multiple silos. We're at time now, and but before I do let people know who's on next week, do you want to give the audience where they can find you, your product, maybe any events you're doing soon?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. I think I'm the only Ian Whitestone. So you can find me on LinkedIn, ian@select.dev. Shoot me an email if you have questions about any of the stuff I've talked about, what our product does. If you're interested in learning more, yeah, reach out. We have a book demo button on our website, which just books time on my calendar. So you'll get to shoot the shit with me for an hour. If that is a selling point, I don't know. So yeah, thanks so much for having me, Chris. And yeah, all the best.
No problem. I say we could have ranted for a lot longer. We weren't short of things to talk about. So I just put next week we've got the legend Bill Inman on the show, talking the new T for ETL, and that's the T's for text. So interesting to see what he's going to be talking about with regards to the platform DataBox and being able to ETL your text data now. So that's next week. We've got a meetup on Wednesday in London, anywhere around London. Hope to see you all down there. Yeah, reach out to Ian. I say my team love working with him. They love what he's doing. So highly recommend looking at what they've got. And yeah, thanks again for coming on the show, Ian.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure talking to you. No problem at all.
All right, you too.
All right.
See you later.
We'll call it a wrap. Thanks, everyone.